Basically, when you make your first movie, like everybody, you have no money whatsoever. And so you can do one of two things. If you write a screenplay and have all this ambition and get very specific, you have to go and then find those things or build those things. And it gets really, really expensive. Whereas if you just walk around and see what is happening for free, like crazy kind of environments and situations, and then you just chuck your actors into those situations and film a scene, it's really, really cheap. And so I did this giant monster movie because I love science fiction. And we ended up going to Central America, and there was just five of us in a van, and we drove around and we just went to each town and crazy location and would say, is there anything strange around here? And they'd say, oh, there's a flood in the village next door, or there's a big festival about the dead over there, or a forest is burning down over here. And we would go with this little treatment I had and chuck the actors out, and we would basically film a scene against this backdrop. And so we rolled with all the punches, and then I had to do all the visual effects myself at home on a home computer. And so it was really, really super cheap, but hopefully looked way bigger than it was. And it was a very creative experience. And ultimately, it's what led me to have these, like, basically get teleported to the Super Bowl and do these giant blockbusters.
So this would have been at a point when it was possible to do film quality visual effects on a home computer, I guess.
From a technical pixel level, yes, film quality. From a creative level, I would never describe anything I've done as film quality.
You and me both.
But good enough to get away with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen the making of. Now I bought the DVD for Monsters. I've seen even the road signs were done in CGI, and
Yeah, we didn't build anything, so we didn't even have an art department with this like scenes where they look at maps of how to get across this infected zone with these giant monsters, and we didn't even have those. So we would have them look at like hamburger menus in restaurants, and then in the computer we changed the menus to be like a big display about how to cross America, Mexico to get to America, and it's one of the easiest things to do in the computer because it's 2D. It's way easier and cheaper. That I could do those shots in just a few hours. It was way easier than trying to build a sign and take it with us. So,
but there is the element where as soon as something passes in front of that map, even though it's 2D, you suddenly have to draw around the person that's appearing in front of it. That strikes me as something that's like really hard work. And if you get it wrong at all, then the audience are going to notice.
yeah, it's called rotoscoping, and it's tedious stuff. It usually gets in a big company, gets farmed out to other countries. But recently AI has gotten pretty good at it. And so it's getting easier and easier. And so, yeah, so what I would do is I just stick a film on or some making of, a film in the background. And I just commit like 2 hours of cutting around someone's fingers or hair. And it's not like it's something you can do. It's just, you need to put the time in. It's not like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? It's just, oh God, it's going to be a really boring 3 hours now as I do all this stuff. So I play music or try and distract myself.
The crazy thing is, when you see a big Hollywood blockbuster and you watch the credits, you will see the number of visual effects artists that are involved. And I would imagine that translates to thousands and thousands of man hours. It's not physically possible for one person like you to spend the same number of hours. So I'm wondering whether all those visual effects artists are actually necessary.
No, I would never say that. They're all my close friends. What I would say is that there is a limited bandwidth to what the human brain can take in. If I was to grab a magazine or a newspaper and hold it up in front of you, for the average duration of a shot in a movie is about 3 seconds. So if I was to hold it up for 3 seconds and then pull it away, you could never tell me every single thing that was written on that paper. You'd probably describe 2 images, headline, maybe a few sentences. And it's like that in a shot. There's only so much you can take in. And so the way I would work, and still do really, is try to put all the energy where your eye goes. And so we used to have this conversation all the time with the producers on my first film, where, maybe the third time or fourth time you loop a shot, you spot something or you have a problem with something. And I would say, yeah, but if someone goes to see our film 4 times, we've won. Do you know what I mean? Like, they probably have bought the Blu-ray, right? So like, let's all celebrate that they spot that. You know what I mean? It'll be amazing when they spot that problem. And so on that level, I could get away with it, but it's still true on the higher level of like, let's at least target all the resources into the areas that matter, and let's not build and create stuff with all these man hours that no one's ever going to really care about. And so that, I think, as a having done visual effects, I felt I wasted my whole life for a long time because I always wanted to just make films. But now looking back, I think the one thing it's helped me with is that dividing of time and resources between, look, let's not build that, we can do that really well in the computer, or let's not do that in the computer, it's a nightmare, let's really put that in front of the camera. I think that's probably the valuable sort of lesson I got from doing computer graphics.
So it seems to me the creator has been made in a very similar way to Monsters. You film the story, you know that there will be some visual effects in there, but it's not the case that each shot is meticulously mapped out in the same way as most movies. Would that be right?
Yeah, totally. It was essentially trying to get back to all the pros and positive elements of doing a guerrilla film, a VFX heavy guerrilla film. And what you can do, I think, what's a much better result is on these big movies. What you do is you start off normally by doing concept art and all this imagery, and then you chase that imagery the whole life of the film, where it's like, no, it's got to look like this, and there's no reason it has to look like this. It just has to look good. And so it's a way more efficient and exciting and interesting process if you basically go to a location that's like the place in the scene. And we learned that if the crew is small enough, it's cheaper to fly anywhere in the world than it is to build a set. And so with a small crew, we basically went to 7 different countries, and whatever was the best place in the world we could find for that scene, we would go there and shoot it there. And knowing that in the computer afterwards we can change things. And so what you do is you film, you find beautiful shots, you find real world things, and you get inspired, and the shot itself already looks good before you hand it over to the visual effects company, Industrial Light and Magic in this case. And so we would then, in the end, which normally happens at the beginning, we would do it at the end. We would then do all the design for the film. So we would create still frames, like frame grabs, just like you would on your laptop as you're watching a movie. We'd create these JPEGs. And then with the production designer, James Klein, we would start experimenting, and very quickly it just take a few minutes, like trying ideas of like what a building could look like, what a car could look like. And when you see it that's it in its final shot, and you're just doing experiments with shapes, it's much, much easier you basically know there's no reason to build the back of it because we never see it. The thing that's important is the light from here that catches this bit. We never see that side of it. And so you do things that feel like way more correct and more efficient in terms of the audience's attention and eye to the designs and stuff, than if you did the design independently and then stuck it in the shot and then go, oh, the thing that looks good about it, you never actually see. And so it was a great way of working. And it meant, though, that Industrial Light and Magic, who's like, the biggest, best visual effects company in the world, had to blindly agree to just do all these shots, not knowing what they would be, not knowing how many there were. It was quite a semi-suicidal undertaking for a VFX company. And so, but thankfully, I think they agreed to do it. I don't know how they feel about it now. I think with this nomination, they're probably cool.
Yeah, I reckon they're cool. It does seem like this is a question of trust. This is somehow persuading a big studio to let you rip up the rule book and say, trust me, this will work. How on earth did you persuade them?
We actually did a test. I'd worked with them before on Star Wars, on Rogue One, so we all knew each other pretty well. And I did a test where I knew this was going to be an issue for everybody, and even for myself. I was like, is this like, am I just deluded? And so we asked for some money from the studio and said, can we do a location scout? And we didn't tell them, but we snuck a camera with us. And it was just me and Jim Spencer, who was the producer of my first film, Monsters. And we went to 7 different countries around the world. It was the greatest hits of Southeast Asia. And I would be like in Angkor Wat, and this like monk would walk past, and I would just shoot him with this like 1970s camera lens. And then thinking in my head, oh my God, if we could make him a robot, it would be incredible. Like, I've never seen anything like that in a film. And so I shot all this material, cut it together as like an 8-minute kind of up its own little art house holiday video, and and then and then basically did try to do the process. So sat with James Klein, our production designer, and he painted over them. We then had that went down next to another artist. Like, so for instance, there's a shot in the test where we were like on a train in Tokyo passing the city, and it was like, okay, let's make the city a big science fiction city. So we did a few sketches. James, arrived at what would look like a cool sci-fi shape, and then essentially an artist came in and tidied that up in Photoshop, made it look real, and then that got stuck onto what you'd call like simple, like 2.5D geometry. So it had parallax. So as you move around the buildings with the train, you see the shapes move, and it worked really well. And normally in a film, having done these films, to do a big city like that, you're looking at like a month to do a shot like that. And they build the whole city and they do it in all 360 degrees. Whereas this was a complete cheat. And it looked really good. And we did it in like a couple of days. And so we ended up showing this test back to the studio, and they knew how little money they'd given us. And they were just like, oh my God, if you do that in the movie, that they would be so happy. Like that, they'd go for it. And it kind of greenlit the film doing that little test.
I've heard you describe it like this before, but I wonder whether you can do similar for me and then go on to explain why. You've talked about the fact that most of the movie budget is this, and then you have a little bit left for whatever emergencies, and you flipped it round. And so I wonder whether you can kind of summarize why you were able to make this film for so little money, relatively, and how you left a much bigger part for everything that came after.
Yeah, I mean, what happens on a big movie inevitably is you have big action set pieces. You have all this stuff where you do really need 200, 300 people potentially, right? But the way the schedule of a big movie works is there's also drama scenes where it's just two people in a room chatting, and you'll find there's 200 people stood outside just like bored, waiting for the day to end, and it gets super expensive, and it's because of actor availability and all sorts of other reasons, logistics, and so we just tried to keep everything small. And what allowed for that, which was a new kind of what couldn't happen 5 years ago, was camera technology had gotten really good. So we shot the movie on a new camera that came out just before we started filming, which was called the Sony FX3, and it's kind of the size of a domestic tourist mirrorless camera, and it is very cheap. It's about $4,000, which for a giant movie is a really cheap camera. But we would have paid $100,000 for that camera, because the reason we wanted it is it shoots at what's called 12,800 ISO. So it's the sensitivity.
Really low light.
Yeah, like in moonlight, so you can see at night, a lot of the time. And it meant, just working backwards, the camera was small. It meant it could now go on a piece of an equipment called a gimbal, which stabilizes the shot, which means I could hold it all day without getting tired. And so wherever you put the camera and move around, it looks stable. It looks like very cinematic. It's not like a handheld documentary feel. It's more classical cinema feel. And then because of the sensitivity of the camera, it meant we didn't need really powerful, crazy, massive lights on big cranes all the time. We could have battery operated LED lights. And so just like you have a boom operator with a microphone, we had what's called a best boy, Nancy, her name was, and she had a pole with the light on the end. And so as we're filming a scene, I suddenly want to go around here. Normally on a movie, that would take 15 minutes to move all the lights and move all the equipment. I would just move with the camera, and she would move with the light, and within like 5 seconds it was all relit, like another setup, as it's called. And so we could film for like 45 minutes sometimes without cutting, and kind of get the whole scene from all different angles. And it was a massively liberating thing, that I think helped us basically do it a lot cheaper than a normal film. And so even though I hope visually when you watch it, and also the fact we were in these crazy countries like Indonesia and Nepal and Tokyo and Thailand, it looks bigger than your average film, because every single location is just like, wow, like an Instagram destination. It really was. Actually, there was a lot. We had to move a few of those Instagram standees, that people would stand next to, because it's like one of the world, and we'd have to be like, this is going to ruin everything. Like, we'd try and pick it up and move it. But yeah, it was a lot of reasons all combined that it felt like we couldn't have done 5 years ago. The technology wasn't there.
So it's new camera, it's your confidence that you'll be able to sort it in VFX afterwards without that meticulous planning for every single shot. And then it sounds like it's people and time are the main cost of a movie then. And by cutting down the number of people and the amount of time that it takes to shoot a shot, that really brought your costs down.
Yeah, I think so. Also, filming in Thailand, for a lot of it, obviously you get your money goes a lot further there. Um, yeah, it's like I would say, like there's that triangle. I used to work in a cash and carry when I was in a summer job during film school, and there was in the staff room there's a triangle, and it said fast, good, cheap, pick two. And I feel like we got all three. And it's because the technology has changed. Well, the good bits up for other people to say. I don't mean it like that, but
Well,
it was.
you're on the short list, so I think we can kind of accept that you achieved good.
Yeah, we hope so. I don't know. But yeah, so it was. It weirdly, it's like. I mean, I went to look at a virtual studio before we started filming. So it's one of those studios that has all volume capture, and you do it all in the computer. And I was just out of curiosity, I went to see one in Los Angeles, and on the outside in the corridor, it had a poster, and it was like a Venn diagram of the process of making a film, and it was like pre-production and production and post-production, and editing and director and screenwriter and all this stuff. And I was like, why have they got this up on the wall? This is such an obvious thing for filmmaking. It seemed really strange. And then the guy saw me looking at it and went, "Oh, you're looking at our poster?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he said, "That's over 100 years old." And then I looked carefully and I was like, "Oh God, yeah." The paper was really weird in the font, and I was like, "Oh my God, we have not changed how you make a film in 100 years." For what is such a technological industry, the idea that no one went, "Wait a minute, this whole thing with a clapperboard." Like, do we really need to do that anymore? Like, my phone can stream and Bluetooth, and like, what are we doing here? And everyone looks at you like, shush. Like, what are you saying? Don't question the process. And so I think there's loads of innovation to be had, and all these new technological breakthroughs that are around the corner that really feel like they're on the horizon. I think it's very exciting. If you're like a up and coming filmmaker, like a young filmmaker, I think it's probably the most exciting time to have been born, really, right about now.
What technologies are you keen to try then? What's just around the corner that you haven't been able to use in production yet?
Well, the big elephant in the room is obviously AI, right? And nobody really knows where it's going to go. Um, Anyone who tries to if I say anything right now, you can play this clip back in 3 years and I'll look like an idiot. I'm going to be wrong. But with all these breakthroughs, what's really interesting? There's a lot of interesting things about it, but I think one of them is, if you look at the timeline of the history of cinema, and there's many technological advances like color and sound. There's one that we all know, a dotted line, early 90s, we can sort of say basically before CGI, after CGI. And after that dotted line of CGI, essentially what happened after that is you can now make anything you can imagine. You know what I mean? Like that were the films that came after it, and you think, oh my God, that is going to be so exciting. That's going to be incredible. Can you imagine what we're going to get? And I think a lot of people who are film fans, if you said, are all the best movies before that dotted line or after that dotted line? I think a lot of people would say, well, probably most of my favorites are probably before, or at least maybe I'm showing my age, right? But there's something sometimes about being limited and having limitations. And I think when these Pandora's boxes open and it gets all very exciting, there's a gold rush. Everyone runs in, tries to show off and be the first to do something massive, and I think the things that stand the test of time are the things that, are mainly about story or creating a cinematic experience that is more timeless and not a gimmick really based on some new breakthrough. And so I think AI is going to bring with it a gold rush and really like shake things up in a big way. But I like to think that it'll ultimately all come back down to storytelling and emotion and all the things it always has. But it's that curse, isn't it? May you live in interesting times.
Yeah, yeah.
They get very interesting.
I mean, case in point, we watched The Whale last night, and I think it's fantastic. And it's pretty much entirely, in fact, thinking about it, yeah, it's entirely set in a living room. That's it. And also, I agree with you, the CGI can do everything, so we will do everything, the movies that would have come out in the last 10, 15 years where they just get bigger and more spectacular. I kind of got a bit bored with that. But interesting, it's another fascinating thing about monsters, even when you could have put up a road sign, you decided not to. But it's not to go, but there's a massive thing there. It's just it made more sense for the way you were making the movie.
But also putting up a road sign meant maybe have commitment issues, right? But it meant like going down a road, going, okay, we'll put it here, hammering it in, taking half an hour, driving the car back and driving past it, trying to get the shot. And then maybe it's like, oh, it didn't look very good, or the weather changed. It was a lot more efficient to go, let's just drive down this road for an hour and I'm going to film every single sign we pass. And then in the edit later, I'll pick the best moment that just looked the best and then we'll change that, and it makes for a better shot. And it's also more natural. It's like when things feel contrived and presentational to camera, you sort of sense it. And my favorite things about what ILM did in The Creator is the stuff where we were like, say we went to like a real village in the Himalayas and we shot real families just existing, and like an old lady just giving her grandson a chocolate bar or whatever. And as I'm filming it, I'm thinking, oh my God, if we could make her a robot. I've never seen that in a film before. Like the idea of something so intimate and beautiful, but with AI. And so like these were the sort of shots I was trying to find and give to ILM and it was the most exciting stuff, because when you're doing a science fiction film, it's really hard, especially even a robot film, it's really hard to do something new. You know what I mean? It's like everyone's kind of tried to do everything you could think of. And I felt like the one thing that hadn't been done that was for us, felt like this is probably why we're making the film, is to have really naturalistic, very human, emotional performances, but from a robot. Like normally robots are like, they either act like this and talk like this, or a very like there's a soullessness from it. I basically didn't tell people towards the end whether they were going to be AI or not in the movie, which made the visual effects really difficult because we didn't have tracking markers or anything on anybody. You normally have those silly pajamas with all the dots on. I found that once you tell someone they're a robot, they start behaving like a robot, and then also you're committed to them being a robot, and you can end up shooting a shot and you've got some guy in those dot pajamas who's just slightly in frame, and you're like, oh my God, we've now got to spend $10,000 making his arm into a robot arm. You know what I mean? And no one cares. And so like instead it was like, okay, the downside is it'll be really hard to track everybody and put them in the computer, but the upside is we can edit the movie. And then there was this really nice day about halfway through the edit where we sat and watched it, and basically depending on the cut and depending where your eye would go, it'd be like, okay, my eye went to that lady, make her a robot. And so you basically, anywhere your eye went, we made them into robots. And then so your brain starts to think there's way more robots than there really is. And so it was actually a way more efficient of approaching it, a way more efficient way of approaching it all.
And I don't know how to describe it, but it is, there is this mantra that planning is important, and but it sounds like you can overplan and that gets expensive, but also you're only doing the visual effects on almost a finished 2 hours or whatever, rather than planning for maybe 5 hours of visual effects, which you then throw most of them away.
Yeah, and also I think a trick you can't help but learn from George Lucas in Star Wars is that you have to throw stuff away. So you have to kind of like sort of imply some really crazy sci-fi building or character and just keep going, and the audience thinks, basically starts to think, oh my god, there's stuff everywhere, and if the camera panned right or left, there's a whole new world of things, and there isn't. It's literally, we're just putting in what you see. But like we shot so much aerial photography, so like with drones again, like we used drones that you can buy for $2,000, like just prosumer drones, and there's kind of cinema resolution 4K, and and instead of being specific, you just try and find beautiful shots around mountains and things. And then later in the edit, when we were like, okay, we need to set up this environment, or we need to do this, or need to do that, I had like literally like 10 hours of aerial material, and I would go through and go, well, maybe we could put the car on this thing, and maybe there's no road, maybe they could put a road on as well, and you would sort of, and then you'd give that as the shot. And there's something way more, like, I don't know, it just feels more exciting that way, and more fresh, because it's not what you think you should do. It kind of, you found it in the real world, and it was like a beautiful moment that was just sort of given to you.
Are you unconventional? Are you avant-garde? Are you the first of a new wave of director? How would you describe yourself?
I always think I'm not pushing things enough. Like, I always think I've conformed and sold out. And like I look at my heroes who I think didn't, and I'm like, beat myself up, like, must try harder.
Who are your heroes?
And well, growing up, the heroes were obvious, like Spielberg, um, George Lucas, James Cameron, in terms of science fiction. Um, Later in life, artistically, it's film. Like, this film was very much inspired by a film called Baraka, a director called Ron Freaky, and directors, music video directors like Chris Cunningham, Jonathan Glazer.
But how can you beat yourself up saying you're not pushing yourself enough? I mean, the whole story around the creator is how surely you're doing things completely the other way to most Hollywood movies that look anything like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could go further. Like, I think we could go a lot further and do something a lot more unique as well, which is exciting, which is, makes you want to pick up a camera and go shoot another film. I guess the downside of it, to be honest with you, is if you're trying to do something original, like having done these massive franchises, there's pros and cons, and the cons are, you've got this giant fan base and all this pressure, and you cannot fail. It better be a massive hit, because there's so many people queuing up waiting for it to see it. When you do an original science fiction, that you've got the opposite problem. No one's heard of it. No one cares. You know what I mean? You've got to educate the world that this film exists and what it's about and why you should go see it. And so it's always a double-edged sword, like, of trying to do something new, and but if it's too out there, you kind of, especially at this budget level, everyone talks about the film being way lower budget than normal for this kind of movie, but it still was a lot of money, and we had to have a hit, basically. And so yeah, there was a lot of pressure on it. You have different, I think every time you make a film, you have a different set of pressure. And I think on this one, definitely the pressure was, I just made all this up, this didn't really happen. And you'd be stood there sometimes on set going, and there's all these people helping you and doing all this stuff, and you'd be like, I was lying. There's no way out. Like, I just made this up in my head, and everyone's like helping me create it. And oh my God, what if I'm wrong? And it doesn't work. And And whereas with a big franchise, the pressure isn't that. You know people are going to come and see it. The pressure is are you going to do a good job of that version? You know, so it's very hard to I think the day you get through a film and it was everything about it was easy and fun and enjoyable, I think that's probably the day you make it your worst movie, and you should probably retire afterwards.
I've, I have had similar experiences where I've gone on stage feeling very like this is going to be easy and it's the worst day. Sandy Toxvik says always go on stage needing a wee because it just keeps the adrenaline up. So, you know.
Actually, you say that, right? So I got a story. Do you want a story real quick about that?
Yeah.
So we go to Comic Con to show the film for the first time, and it's the first time we've shown a scene or anything from the movie to anybody ever. It's a really big deal. And the way Comic Con is laid out, you've got all the fans basically, and then the filmmakers are kind of funneled through all these back corridors. And I had a real big headache, and I was like, I think I'm dehydrated. And someone went, "Do you want some water?" And they gave me a big bottle of water, and I necked it like an idiot. And then we walked all the way to the stage, and then suddenly it hit my bladder, and I really needed to pee. And I said, "I need to go to the restroom." And they were like, "Oh, we're about to go on." And it was like nearly an hour and a half or something. This talk, it was really long. I can't remember. And then I was like, "Oh," and then suddenly like, "And Gareth Edwards," right? And you go on, and I'm like, "I'm going to pee my pants." And so I sit on the stage, and I actually at one point during the panel, I looked down to see if people will see if I pee myself, and they won't, right? There's a banner blocking the table, and so I'm thinking, I think I'm just going to do it because I was in like physical pain from needing to go. And then they played like my friend, this filmmaker friend's clip of his movie, and it was my first chance to go pee, and I was like, it's going to look so rude if I get up now when his clip's playing. So I had to hold it in again, and then it was my clip, and I was like, I'm allowed to go now because it's my own clip. And so it's that thing you dream of all the entire life of the movie, which is I'm finally going to show. We can finally show the world all these great visual effects and everything for the creator, and I'm so excited. And I had to leave and go urinate. And what was really funny is as I was stood at the urinal peeing, I felt this fan come up who had spotted me, and he had a Rogue One poster and a pen to sign it. And I was like holding myself like, this is about as awkward as it gets right now. And I could hear all the sound and everyone cheering and from the film. And I was like, this is a classic Hollywood moment. Like it never unfolds how you think.
What's weird is that's not going to make the piece about the creator, but that might very well make Twitter. So as long as you're cool with that.
No, totally. Anything that it's all good. It's true.
So can you just give me an idea about you as a person? So I know a little bit about how it started, but you're fascinated not just with telling a story, but also with the technical process of enhancing those shots in a way that a lot of people aren't. So can you sum up your fascination with visual effects and where it started?
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I see what you mean, but so I think I've always been very visually driven, a lot more than literally words, driven. I feel like if you got a script and for classic movies and you give someone a pen and said, just read the script and mark every time you see something really good, they'd mark certain sections. Then if you hit play on the movie to someone else, you said, press this button every time something really good happens, those places would be completely different. Like the way a film works in an audiovisual experience is something unique to cinema, I think, which is why I love it so much. It's more like a dream or a memory. It's not a book. It's not a play. It's something that goes straight into your brain as if it's an experience you were having. And it's even more engaging than virtual reality. I've got right here. And I thought, and when I bought it, I thought, there goes my life. I'm going to be on that thing all the time. And I play with it for like an hour or two, and then I'm like, and then I've not touched it in 6 months. It's for some reason it doesn't grab you like a film does. And so yeah, so visually, basically, I went to film school, did all that, and then my goal was to show my film to Hollywood, my short film, my student film to Hollywood, and then get offered a big directing deal. And all I got was this very polite rejection letter. And so I was like, oh my God, I got to figure out what to do. And so my flatmate was studying this new thing called computer animation. Jurassic Park had just come out in the cinema. It was clearly the future of filmmaking. And so I bought a computer and just got really into visual effects, thinking that in 6 months I would use that technology and I'd go make a film. And 10 years went by and I was still learning. And it was just, but what happened in that, it's all subconscious in it. People talk about putting 10,000 hours into something and then you like are okay at it. And I definitely put 10,000 hours into visual effects. And I think what's come out the other end of it is a real strong opinion about imagery. And and so as a filmmaker now, it's a little bit like having being on the spectrum or something. Like it's a little bit like obsessive compulsive with images, you know, like an image turns up or some reason you're trying to design something, think of something, and it's like you just get really obsessed with what to do to that image. So you go, oh, if I saw that, I'd be jealous of that. If someone else had that in a film and I went to the cinema, I'd be like, oh man, I should have done that. And so, and I love an image, you know, there's all cliches, isn't there? Like an image speaks 1,000 words. I just think images are very, you can carry an image with you for the rest of your life. You can see it once and remember it till your dying day. Like when they're really strong and they have some meaning behind them, it can often be subconscious, but there's like a more profound primal reason why you gravitate to that image, why it speaks to you. And you can't explain it. Like that's my favorite thing is you can see something, you can have a feeling about it. And if someone says, write down in words why you have that feeling, like someone's play your favorite song, a beautiful song, something with just melody, and someone said, write down why it's amazing. You ultimately can't, it doesn't translate. It's its own thing. It speaks its own language and it can't become words. And that's the ultimate irony of cinema is to get a film made, you have to write words. It's called a script. And there's a limit to what words can do, which is not the limits of what cinema can do. And so this barrier to entry, which is always a screenplay, is fascinating to me because it's like, it feels like the wrong kind of document half the time. And with all these technological breakthroughs, like Pixar, for instance, you know, the way they develop films is a lot more visually. They create animatics, they're called. So like you know, using stills and sometimes animation, they tell this, you can hit play and watch the whole film. A friend of mine used to work at Pixar and he started making live action films. He's a very talented guy. And as a result, he didn't write a script for his next film. He did an animation, like as in like storyboards and he invited us all to a screening and he hit play. And for an hour and a half, we watched his new film as like storyboards. And he wanted any feedback and it was like, oh my God, this is a really brave and interesting way to develop a film. And it's all about iteration. Like it feels like the more you can iterate, like the more you can perfect something. Mm-hmm. And with the creator, we had a deal with ILM. It was probably because it was just easy to say as a phrase, but we had this 3 strikes you're out deal. Like in order to pull the visual effects off for the time we had, because we had so little time because of the money, and everyone was being so efficient with the, you know, and unique with their way of solving a shot.
So every shot had 3 strikes and you're out. That sounds quite deadly.
It wasn't, but it was what it is. It's normally with I'm going to speak on their behalf, right? But normally with a filmmaker that doesn't have a background in visual effects, it can really backfire showing them a work in progress. You know what I mean? Like if you show someone and it looks like a bad PlayStation game and it's blocky animation, or like, you could panic the filmmaker and they don't understand. No. All these elements are going to get corrected. What you're looking for is the timing of, does it move in and rotate the right way? And so it can scare everyone. And so there's a tendency in the industry, don't show the shot until it's nearly finished, right? The problem is that you've used up 90% of your resources, and then if the filmmaker then says, oh no, I thought it was going to be this, you spend twice the amount getting back to that. And so the deal with Industrial Light and Magic, which they said that they don't normally do, but we did it on this one, which was very unique, was they showed stuff in really crude form. So like basically the rule of thumb was, if that's the amount of time it takes to shot, a third of the way through show it, another third show it, and then show the final thing with final thoughts, you know? And seeing it really early like that, you could go, oh, if there's a misunderstanding, like, no, it's really big, it's out of the frame and blah, 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 blah. And no, and actually don't rotate it this way because all it matters is this bit. Then you can have all those conversations, and it's so much more efficient because before anyone's done any work, it's been course corrected. And so I think having a background in visual effects give them peace of mind to sort of like take off, you know, expose themselves like that. And that was great, and that was really important for the whole process.
Yeah, I think you're talking about a confidence of whoever it is who's watching they won't be called dailies or whatever, to understand, as you say, that these are not the finished effects, but it's just more important that, you know, we can all imagine what it's going to be like. Let's assume it's going to look great, but is it in the right place? And my friend Ben Barfoot, who works for us, he's now just finished editing his second movie. His first one was called Double Date, and it's just a really good horror comedy. But his test screenings, he was explaining, you know, in front of a knowledgeable audience, but still there's just empty slates everywhere saying VFX here or something. And so you've really got to trust your test audience to kind of imagine their way past that, so they don't go, well, that didn't look very good. So I think that sounds like what you were saying.
Yeah, we went up to Industrial Light and Magic with, so when you make a film, you do what's called a director's cut, which basically you get, because of the union rules, you get 10 weeks to do your own version of the film. And then at which point, you know, you show the studio, and then it becomes more like a team effort,
right, to
get it over the finish line. And basically you show people, you do test screenings, you do all sorts of stuff. And so when I finished that director's cut, I had a version, but there was no visual effect, it was just text. And my joke is, you know, it was a beautiful font. It was Futura. It looked great. But I would go, we went up to San Francisco because there's always this dilemma of like, do we show the whole VFX team the movie? Or will it freak them out? And I'd heard stories. Some people who worked in visual effects had told me stories about how a filmmaker came in and showed them the film to get everyone excited. And it did the opposite effect, where everyone was like, oh my God, this is the film, you know what I mean? And so I was like, oh God, I hope this might backfire, but let's go do it. So we went up to San Francisco, and in the big theater there at Lucasfilm, we showed the whole movie to everyone. And I was just sitting there, and it's the first time we've shown it to any significant people outside of the edit suite. And it ended, and then all these guys and girls turned around, and we're all cut from a similar cloth, you know what I mean, grew up in VFX, and they all turned around, and they were all like bloodshot eyed, and they'd been crying, and I was like, oh my God, thank God. and then on the way home, I was like, wait a minute, maybe they weren't crying because it was a really emotional film. Maybe they were realizing they had so much work to do, and they weren't going to see their family for the next year.
Can we talk about the actors? So your style is very much, you want to be as free as possible with the camera. You don't want to be encumbered by calling cuts and by having to have everyone in the pajamas with the balls. How do the actors feel about working this way?
The actors, once they get used to it, like there's a little, I think I didn't explain it to people. I didn't sort of say, by the way, this is what we're going to do. It just sort of happened. And then after the first take, you see them go, oh, okay, that was really interesting, you know, and they sort of finding their feet a little bit. But I felt all of them, I really did think actually all of them were like, this is a really fun way to do it, because what happens is, you know, when you say action and cut, and then you rejig things, you say action and cut, it's really hard to stay for them, I think. It's hard to stay in the moment. And so it's not just my benefits, it's also for the actors in that they'll sense you moving. And sometimes I'll even go, just go back, I'll just whisper it like, just go back. And they'll rewind the scene by like 20 seconds, and someone will just start talking like 20 seconds earlier. because I missed something or something. And we go and go. And if they turn to me at the end and go, can I do another? I'd be like, yeah, yeah. And they just go again. And so it's like, it's a two-way street. Like they get to play and they go, can I try something? Yeah. And so they just go off because we've got the time, because the way we're filming it, they can experiment and they can like mess around and do something that fails, and it's no big deal. And so I think I hope, it's as much a good thing for them. And that said, there were set pieces, there were big action sequences in this film where it wasn't that. It's this shot, and you've got to get in here whilst this explosion happens. And so, it was a mixture, like a hybrid of, I used to always jokingly refer to the style of the film, and obviously these are two masters of cinema, so I'm not saying it's like that, as if Terrence Malick had sex with James Cameron and had a baby. And that was like the ultimate high benchmark of what this film was trying to do.
Well, I'm sure. I mean, that's an image that many of us will not know what to do with, including Malick and Cameron. I assume. You described that this new camera is available. You have explained quite well how you can make a film that looks more expensive for less money because you're not building things on it unnecessarily. Why isn't everyone making films like this?
Because I don't know. This is really much more of a question for other people, but I think that
Or does it take a certain kind of director with a certain kind of knowledge of what's possible to be able to do this?
I don't know. I think the process of making a film is a big film, and theatrical film is, if I'm honest, if everyone's honest, it's far too complicated. I'm very jealous of people who are musicians and songwriters, in that they can pick a guitar up, put it round, and they can strum like a C or D or whatever, and just start figuring out a tune. And they can get it to a point where it's like 80%, you can hear it and go, that's great. That should happen. Here's the deal. Now go make the good version of that. I love it. It's beautiful. You've affected me. It's great. We have to go and spend like $100 million and work with hundreds of people to get it to the point where you can sit and watch and go, okay, I get it. That's great. And so there's this massive financial gamble by people. So it's a really big ask and scary time for anybody. And it's like, if you were making a film, if you were if you were a musician, like a songwriter, making a movie is like it's taking away the guitar and saying, no, that's not how we do it. How we do it is you have to write down the sheet music first, right? And then 10 people will read that sheet music and decide but then some people read it and go, wait a minute, you've got 7 D chords in here. We just released a track with 6 D chords. Could you use more A chords, and then it's like, actually D chords are way more expensive than C's. So you can only have 3 Ds, and you can have 5 C's, right? And you go crazy because you're trying to make something artistic, or like a creative thing, but the maths and the economics come into it in a big way. And you can't blame anyone, because this is the kind of money, like, I wouldn't, you know what I mean? Like, I feel the same way if it was my money. Like, these are massive, massive financial gambles. So
you are describing a world now where maybe, and I'm sure music has worked in the same way in the past, although albeit much lower budgets, but things have become democratized because you can now write and produce a song in your bedroom. And I suppose you're describing cameras coming down in price. You've demonstrated that you can do VFX on a laptop effectively. Yeah. You don't need as many lights, and you don't need as many people. So maybe it's happening. It's just taking this amount of time, because you're not playing songs just through headphones. You're putting your work on a massive screen, so it's got to kind of look believable on that kind of scale.
Well, look, here's the upside, right? The audio always goes through these digital revolutions before video and film, right? Because it's less data. So like, we had digital music, in the 80s, synthesizers and all sorts, before there was digital films in the 90s, yeah. And so this idea that filmmaking could one day become like strumming a guitar, and you could have like a Noel Gallagher making a film, and it's undeniable how good that is, before anyone spent a dollar making it. I like to think the day that comes, whenever that may be, we will have, just like the birth of rock and roll, you might have a wave of brilliant storytelling. And I don't know if that's true, but I'm optimistic about it. Like that, I want to stay optimistic about it.
What do you think about generative AI when it comes to the imagery, to videos and to still images? Because there's a lot of um, questions around whether that could ever be used or whether it's just derivative of the training data. Do you think you would be able to use it in your process at all for anything?
Yeah, I think it's this asteroid coming. There's no stopping it. Um, I What's interesting is you look back at other things in history a bit like this, and I heard someone tell me, and I should check this is true. So if you look this up and it's not true, then maybe just don't use it. But someone told me that apparently in the Union of Journalists, when word processing started, they the union banned it for about a year or something, where it was considered this is wrong. You shouldn't be using it as a journalist, right? The idea of like cutting and pasting words and using a computer, it's not right. And we would listen to that now and just laugh, right? And think it was insane. Of course you're going to use it. And I just can't help think that in whatever it might be, 10, 50 years, whatever, people are going to look back at some of the reactions and responses to AI anything, and the fact that we're so nervous and scared and rejecting of it, and we'll laugh too and be like, oh my God, it's like when Photoshop came along. I was very lucky, and we did the test for this movie with John Knoll, and him and his brother basically created Photoshop in their garage when they were young.
Oh, wow.
And when that came out, they everyone had this rejection of it. I mean, everyone had been literally cutting and pasting and doing graphic design physically, and it was this. That's not real. That's no good. It's cheating, and it's not going to go anywhere. And now it's what it actually did is it created. There was way more jobs in the visual arts because of Photoshop than there was before it existed, right? And I just think that's what's going to happen. We're just gonna. It's very hard to see the landscape in the future, but we all want to do this stuff. Everyone likes to create, pretty much, and it would. I think ultimately it's just going to allow more people to have creative jobs of some sort and get rid of laborious things, iterative things that are time consuming. And yes, it pulls from models of things that exist, but that's kind of what everyone's brain is doing all the time. Like I'm saying words to you now, I'm telling you, I can't tell you where I learned any of these words. It happened by osmosis, and I
Well,
don't
your
own any of
entire
it.
directing career, I would imagine, you are the product of your influences.
Yeah, I think I could if you sat me down and went, every single shot in this movie, I want you to try and figure out the inspiration for it from a film you've seen when you were young or something. And you would probably be able to go, each one, you'd probably have a good shot at going, I think that's probably from that. I think that's probably, and that's why going to real world situations is great, because it snaps you out of that. You have a contrived idea based on your AI model of being fed films as a kid, and then you see something, you go, oh, I wouldn't have thought of that, and it makes it more fresh. You do something that isn't in your brain, and so that's the exciting way of snapping out of that, as a human, is to go to the real places and get inspired by something that you never thought of. Yeah.
I think something big has happened in the world of AI just in the last couple of years. So I assume that you started making this film before we started seeing generative AI and chat GPT and everyone started talking about it. Did that change maybe the direction of the movie, or did that make you think, oh, it's happening? I didn't expect it to happen yet, but the film's happening in real life.
Yeah. Yeah, and the reason I made a robot movie is like the holy trinity of sci-fi is a triangle, which is like alien monsters, spaceships, robots. And I'd made like a monster movie. I'd done spaceships with Star Wars and things, and it was like I really want to do a robot film, and so that's why I was doing it. And then you try and find some meat on the bone and find a meaning behind it, and very quickly it's clear that robots, you can use them metaphorically as people, as like the other people who are different to us. So AI in our film is very much about another kind of person that we reject and fear and want to get rid of, just like all through human history. And so it was kind of a fairy tale in that sense. It wasn't meant to be anything about really about AI. But the second you get into the reality of AI and you listen to a whole stack of podcasts and things, one of them that really stood out to me that I thought was interesting is a lady was one of the AI experts was talking about, she did an experiment where she got these toys that were these articulate, I don't know if they were bunnies or dinosaurs, but these articulate toys that you could interact with. And she basically gave them to people. And she said, can you just spend like 15 minutes, half an hour playing with this toy, talking to it? And at the end, she gave them a sledgehammer and said, if you smash it up, I'll give you $100. And nobody could smash it up, even though every single person knew it's just a bunch of plastic. It's not real. There's a thing. It says more about you as a person if you can smash that thing up. You're more of a psychopath, you know. Like we anthropomorphize nearly everything. We talk to things that we know aren't real, you know. Like I talk to my car, you know, if something's not working, you know, we obviously talk to our phones and stuff. And and so I have no doubt at all that when AI turns up, we will treat them as people. I mean, even messing around with ChatGPT now and just out of curiosity, I'm really careful at the end to thank it and apologize if I've offended it, because I know it's like they're going to be our new overlords at some point. And thankfully, because I made this film, though, I'm going to be let off the hook. So when you're all rounded up, they're going to be like, leave him, he gets us.